Today we're going to be covering the death of Doctor Strange, an event that happened sometime last year to tie into the Doctor Strange movie. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you at the ending. Doctor Strange's bedroom is a collection of magical artifacts and old records. He lays in bed, curled up beneath the blankets and his cloak of levitation, but a voice interrupts his slumber. Doc, time to get up! Bats calls floating through the door right up to his face. Time for walkies! You're burning the daylight! And the ghostly basset hound does not leave the Sorcerer Supreme alone. So Strange opens up an eye, pointing out that since Bats is a ghost, he no longer requires walkies. Walkies are for you! Bat says, pointing out that it's for Strange's health. Strange finally relents, getting out of bed, going through his morning ritual. He puts on his clothes and he heads down to the kitchen where he finds Wong making breakfast. Have you been filling Bat's head with worries about my cardiac fitness? He asks as Wong hands him a coffee. Wong smiles and Strange takes it, heading out the door. Enjoy walkies. And they move through the streets of New York with Strange telling Bats that he's far too busy to die. Not sure that's how it works, Bats says, giving Strange the side dog eyes. The day passes quickly with Strange heading to the hospital for surgery, his hands finally having healed after all of these years. It's all so new to him again. And afterwards, he stands out on the balcony drinking his coffee, but his head turns as a magical explosion rips through the city. He doesn't hesitate, leaping into the air, carrying himself along a magical current. Nearby, the police are raising their weapons as the man kneeling in the street continues to exude magical energies. You need to power down now, one of the officers shouts, his finger moving towards the trigger on his pistol. That will be quite enough, officers, Strange says as he comes up behind them, marching through the police force, telling them he'll handle the situation. He doesn't need a bullet, he needs a doctor. Dr. Strange immediately recognizes the villain as Mr. Rasputin, but he also knows the man's real name. He tells Plownick that he is here to help, and Plownick tearfully explains he just wanted power, and that it's dying, something is dying. Strange asks what it is, and Plownick responds with two questions, one answer, Cinnabus. Strange realizes that Plotnik has linked himself with another dimension which is causing his distress. He is able to use his third eye to see the link, and he pulls the thread off of Plotnik's body, severing it with a pair of magical scissors. And in an instant, Plotnik stops his screaming, and the energy exploding out of him dissipates. There. Is that better, Mr. Plotnik? He asks, and Plotnik nods. It's gone. It's quiet, he says quietly, and Strange nods, turning the man over to the police, ordering them to take him to the hospital. And with that, he checks his watch, realizing that he is needed elsewhere. He goes over to Strange Academy, where he finishes his lesson on the history of the Sorcerer Supreme and how one day a new sorcerer will be chosen to take his place. But the bell rings and class is over, and Strange walks out of the room and is followed by the flame-headed Doyle, who desperately needs his attention. Doyle says that something weird is going on and asks if he's heard from his father. Strange shakes his head, having heard nothing from Dormammu recently. What do you mean by weird? Doyle explains that he is connected to the dark dimension and feels that something isn't right. But I'm in the dark here. It's driving me crazy, he says, and Strange nods, explaining that this isn't the first time that he's heard about this. But they're interrupted by the intercom, which asks Strange to come to the baseball diamond. Outside, he quickly joins Magic in her fight against the incursion from the limbo dimension. Gobble their souls! Crack their bones! The creatures are shouting. I'm having a bit of an odd day, but this strikes me as excessively odd, Strange notes to Magic. Agreed. As the Sorcerer Supreme of Limbo, this is embarrassing. I work here, you horrible creatures, she shouts as she swings her sword, chopping off another monster's head. Together, Magic and Dr. Strange work together, finally capturing the last of the creatures, throwing them back through the portal. And afterwards, they both breathe easier. We should speak with Dr. Voodoo about increasing the magical warding. Magic notes, and Strange nods, but is needed elsewhere. The rest of the day passes for the Sorcerer Supreme, but there are magical attacks mixed with a lunch with bats on the couch, chess in the park with an extra-dimensional being, and a good old-fashioned store robbery. That night, Strange finally has time to relax, sitting in his comfy chair with his feet soaking, and he leans back sighing. But a knock at the door forces him to open his eyes again. He stalks downstairs, grumbling about how he should be relaxing instead of entertaining visitors. And before he goes to answer the door, he says to himself that Doctor Strange is never tired and never rumpled. So he swirls magic around him, dressing himself up as the Sorcerer Supreme once more, opening the door and raising an eyebrow at the sight of his visitor. Strange looks at the visitor and simply says, "How odd." The visitor gives him an evil smile, telling him that it is his last day. Magic slams around Strange, pinning his arms to his side, preventing any spells, and the stranger stalks forward, a knife in his hands. "Go on then, but be warned, this will not end the way that you wish." Strange snaps at him, and all goes black. The heroes of the magical community felt it in an instant. The death of the Sorcerer Supreme. Thor saw it as a tear in the barrier of dimensions, and Reed Richards' sensors detected it next. By the time they all arrived at Bleecker Streak, it was far too late. Dr. Strange was dead, laying in a pool of his own blood, his hands severed from his body, and they all began to grieve, not believing that Stephen could really be gone. But the door opens as Mordo walks in, demanding to know who has taken his right to murder Strange. Wong is furious, demanding to know why Mordo would have done this, but after being restrained by Brother Voodoo and Zelma, Mordo informs him that there is nothing that he desired more than Strange's death, but at his hands and no others. "He was mine to kill," Mordo tells Wong simply. Zelma is just shocked, but she turns her head as Steven's Avengers ID card begins to beep, and she picks it up with the voice of Captain America filling the room. "This is an emergency, miss. We need Strange. We're tracking multiple extra-dimensional invasions," Captain America informs her, and Zelma is just staring in shock as an image of Earth and multiple attacks appear. Wong, Voodoo, Kelikis, and Mordo begin to argue, with bats howling, and then there's a sudden bright light as magical beings all turn in shock as a portal opens up, and out steps Stephen Strange. But it's not the Stephen Strange of today, but the one of the past. Zounds! If I've been released, then the worst must have happened. We must move quickly. There isn't much time for me to solve my own murder. Tell me, what year is it? He pulls on his gloves. The magical incursions are happening across the entire world. Agamon was the first to strike, transporting a vast swath of purple dimensional energy into the Gobi Desert. Dagoth razed the sunken city of Kulamesh from the sea floor off the coast of Cornwall. Tyboro claimed his ancient territory in the jungles of Peru. Umar manifested a portion of her kingdom in Antarctica. Meanwhile, Dr. Strange looked at the stunned faces of those gathered around him. "I fear that there may be some of you who do not know who I am. I apologize for the strangeness of my entrance. I presume that I have been murdered." He turns to Wong. "Wong, excellent. And Mordo, what a surprise to find you here with my corpse. And Kelikis, you look like hell, old man." Strange notes, looking at those that he recognizes, and then he leans over his body as Kelikis shouts about having been exiled into the Purple Dimension. The Purple Dimension? I fear that was after my time. He says, and everyone continues to question what is even going on. The Strange from the past explains that many years ago, he severed 1 week from his life to hide it away. A precaution, so that if I were to die, a part of myself, a temporal remnant, could ensure that my affairs were placed in order, that my killer would be brought to justice. Zelma is still in shock, looking down as she realizes that Captain America is still speaking to her, so she holds it out to Dr. Strange, explaining that it's for him. He holds it up, surprised to see Captain America. "Strange, we need you to get it together. We have multiple invasions from different dimensions going on. This is your wheelhouse, Doctor." Captain America quickly explains, but Strange just nods. "The Stephen Strange that you know has been killed, Captain. As it appears that you are friends, allow me to offer my condolences. I am an excerpt from your timeline, kept in reserve in order to investigate my own murder." Captain America pauses at this news for a moment. "Of course," he says simply, and Stephen nods, explaining that they merely need to summon the Sorcerer Supreme. "Who is the Sorcerer Supreme of this time period?" he asks, looking at those gathered around him. Moments later, Stephen is shocked that not only was he the Sorcerer Supreme, but that the world now is without its chief defender of the mystical arts. He finally snaps out of it with Wong's prodding, asking Captain America if the invasions are attacking populated areas. "No, Doctor, they seem to be digging." Steve explains, and Stephen nods, explaining that they just need to ignore them and that the invaders seem to be running from something. But he turns as he hears a voice in his head. "Strange, they're coming for me, I need you." she shouts, and Steven rushes outside, looking up as a woman appears out of thin air, dropping into his arms. "Steven, I knew you'd be here to catch me," Clea whispers weakly, and he puts her down, recognizing her as the young woman from the dark dimension that he met years ago. But Clea looks at him. "You're not Steven. Who are you? What are you?" she asks, and Wong rushes out, seeing Clea and asking why the dimensions are invading. "They're not invading, they're fleeing." She gasps at him, and Wong continues to question her, not aware that a hand is reaching out from a portal. "I'm being hunted." And everyone turns as a portal opens up and a mass of fleshy worms drops in. "So this is where my prey has fled to. Can you smell it, sisters? Can you taste it? The richness of it. Magic!" The crown asks, and Strange raises his hands, magical energy beginning to burn as his friends stand at his back. "Begone, monsters! This woman is under the protection of the Master of Black Magic!" he shouts, and nearby Baron Mordo and Calicus do nothing. "Huh, I'd forgotten you used to call yourselves that." Mordo grins, bidding them farewell as he steps through a portal. "Enjoy dying a second time this evening, Steven. We must be off," Mordo says, and the crown steps forward, asking if the people of this world truly plan to stand against them. "Yes, and here's your only warning. We don't stand alone. Avengers, assemble!" Captain America shouts as he, Iron Man, Captain Marvel, and Thor drop into the street. Strange steps up to them, warning the captain to be wary. "I see their power. They're after the girl," he says, and Steve raises his eyebrow. "Do you mean your wife?" he asks, and Steven turns in shock. "My what?" he gasps, and the crown steps forward, raising her massive sword. "Enough talking! Let's test this world!" Thor leaps forward as a bolt of lightning, his hammer colliding with the crown's sword. "This one has the smell of a godling. Delicious!" Iron Man and Captain Marvel launch towards the word and the crawling, but their attacks do nothing, and both are knocked away by the counterattacks. Thor is quickly beaten back by the crown, and Tony is slammed against a wall by the crawling, her fleshy worms slipping through his armor. "They're in my suit! They're in my suit!" he shouts, and the armor begins to burn. In moments, the Avengers are beaten. "Do not worry for our child, sister. Tell me that we may find enough to sustain him here," the crawling says, releasing Iron Man to the ground, and the word drops Captain Marvel and Captain America, creating a portal for her sisters and disappearing. The crown turns back to them before she steps through the portal. "Keep the woman Magi. We will return for her in a good time. After all, anticipation is the best seasoning," she says, stepping through the portal, and Steven looks at the fallen heroes scattered around him. "Zounds," he whispers. The storyline now moves into the Death of Doctor Strange, the Avengers crossover issue. The Florida Everglades. Several of the extra-dimensional creatures are moving through the swamplands, carrying a massive nuclear bomb with them. One looks around. "The Guardian of the Nexus, the Man-Thing, where is he?" one asks, and another explains that with the death of the Sorcerer Supreme, the Guardian has abandoned his post. They come to a clearing, marveling at the portal that leads to the realms of all realities. "It's beautiful," another gasps as they put down the bomb while a warrior begins to activate it. "The Nexus can only be destroyed from within, so one of us will have to plant the bomb and return with all haste. I would prefer not to, just putting that out there," he notes quietly as the bomb is activated and the warrior stands, but the others stare in horror as a large creature steps through it. "Boy, behind you!" someone shouts, but the Juggernaut comes rushing in, knocking the creatures aside as they scream in terror. Meanwhile, at Tony Stark's brownstone, he continues to scrub himself clean in the shower, thinking about how badly he needs a drink. He can see the crawling when he closes his eyes, feel the worms of her body on his skin. He turns off the shower, ordering his AI to run another scan on his body and armor, to make sure that there's nothing alien inside. Scan complete. No xenobiological material detected. Boss chimes in. Tony sinks to the floor, putting his head in his hands. "Run it again," he says quietly. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers, Carol Danvers, and Thor go over the battle, with Steve promising the group that Tony will be fine. It takes a lot to rattle Iron Man, but the three mothers made him feel helpless. "What about you, Captain Marvel? How are you holding up?" She's okay, but looks down at the coffee in her hand. "Something is coming, Steven. Something worse is coming," she says gently, but their conversation is interrupted by an incoming message from T'Challa, who tells them that the other warlords seem to be quiet, merely hardening their defenses. However, the mountain tells me that they have sent all of the envoys to the same location. A massive energy surge has been detected in the Florida Everglades, Carol. That's where the envoys are. I know you have all endured a great deal, but He tells her and she nods, telling them that they will check it out. Iron Man needs some time, but Tony walks into the room in full armor. Iron Man needs a grilled cheese sandwich and a couple Tylenol. That's all. He tells them, and as they arrive at the Everglades, they discover that the envoys have all been killed. Well, that fight's over. Good job, everyone. Another one for the books. Iron Man jokes, and they move through the bodies trying to figure out what the envoys were doing here and if something else came through that portal. Maybe someone didn't want them using that, pointing to the nuclear bomb laying on the floor. Oh, and a sidebar, it's gonna blow pretty soon, he says as his AI scans the device. Carol holds up her hands, getting local reports that someone is attacking downtown Miami. Does anyone know who Kane Marco is? They're saying it's juggernauts. Plural, she says. And the three of them leave Tony to deal with the bomb, flying quickly over to Miami where they find the two juggernauts destroying things to create a large structure. Let's not go in hot. We still don't know what this is. Steve advises the team, but Thor shakes his head as he aims his hammer at the villains. Nay, Captain. The risk to Midgard of magical incursion is yet too great. He shouts, and the team jumps into battle with Thor taking several punches to the head, while Captain America blocks a blow with his mighty shield. Carol charges forward, but she goes straight through the Juggernaut, flying out the other side and colliding with Steve. The Juggernauts begin to lift up Thor, and his eyes crack with magical lightning. No soul, no mercy! Thor shouts, swinging his hammer and tearing through the strange construct. But the monsters begin to pull themselves back together, revealing that they are made of strangest crimson bands. Crimson bands of Sidorak? Wasn't that one of Strange's spells? Carol questions above them, and two of the Juggernauts continue to build a crimson spire far above their heads. Back over with Tony, though, he's beginning to realize he can't stop the bomb. So he stares at the Nexus and realizes that that's the only way to prevent the bomb from going off here. Carol begins to protest, but Tony ignores her, stepping through the portal. He looks at the strange kaleidoscope of colors and images that greet him on the other side, numerous portals to other worlds floating all around him. God, Steven, the chaos. How did you stand it? He whispers, moving forward, finding someone half in and half out of a portal. He eventually goes through the portal, finding a child, and he asks the AI to scan where he's at. But the child gasps at him, telling him, "No help, nobody left," pointing to the distant Crimson Spire. Meanwhile, back with our heroes, Thor's hammer is flying through the two Juggernauts once again. But as Thor begins to seemingly win against them, another Juggernaut arrives, slamming Thor's head between his hands, drawing blood from the mighty god. Back with Tony, they reach the spire, and the AI gives him a warning of the large psionic energy discharge coming. It's at that moment that Tony's eyes begin to glow and he sees everything. The child's history, the long discarded child of Sidorak, who found a family in this forgotten tribe, who learned that the Crimson Bands were hers to control as well. And when the three mothers came, she fought them with an army shaped by her will. But the child lost, and all who dwelt in this world perished. He realizes that the child was just a scared child trying to get rid of the monsters from underneath her bed. But he turns to find that she is already dead. He tells his AI to give him a full thrust, and he launches back towards the portal. Meanwhile, back with the Avengers, Thor is flying through the spire, trying his best to destroy it. Just as Tony comes back into radio range, telling Carol that they have to leave the spire. It's a headstone, he says, and he'll explain later. She agrees with him and tries to tell Thor to stand down, but he doesn't, rolling around preparing to throw his hammer one last time to destroy it. Carol tells Tony that it's too late. Thor is going to destroy the armor. So Tony realizes that it's all down to a Hail Mary from Iron Man. He launches forward, ejecting from his armor at the last minute, letting it block the blow of Thor's hammer. Carol rushes to his side, wondering if Tony just died. Tony informs her to call off the 21-gun salute. "I lived a carpe another diem," he groans, and Thor lands, ordering Tony to explain himself as he retrieves the hammer. "I don't have to. She's going to," he tells them, pointing at one of the Juggernauts, and he taps her armored helmet. "Hey kid, don't leave me hanging. I took off my armor, now it's your turn," he tells her, and he tells the others that it is merely a wake as he removes the child from her armor, allowing her to place her hands on the spire. The psionic wave moves throughout the entire city, allowing them to see the destruction of the child's realm, of her people, to warn them that the child approaches. And with her work done, the warning put out, the child closes her eyes and allows the tears to finally fall. Long ago, Enchantress pulls Steven closer, smiling, as she tells him that she always knew she'd get him one day. Get off, so I can focus on the task at hand. He snaps at her, pushing her away, turning to his enemies. The evil wizard who currently has your infant twins, he reminds her. But the wizard merely smiles, pointing out that Enchantress has made a deal with him for her firstborn many years ago. Stephen turns back to her. You really made one of those? I'll give you this if you promise me your firstborn deals. He asks with a raised eyebrow, and she smiles. Of course I did. Dozens of times. I never thought I would have kids. As you can see, it kind of backfired. You're the worst, you know that? He says as the magic begins to swirl around him and he casts a spell that hits the wizard Pulsari, quickly turning him into stone. That's a neat trick, Stephen, but when your spell wears off, he'll return for his half of the bargain. Enchantress notes as she frees her children from the statue's grasp. Don't worry, he will remain a stone decoration for as long as I live, Dr. Strange tells her. Now we go back to the present day, the day when Dr. Strange died. Brother Voodoo stands before the students of the Strange Academy, informing them that Dr. Strange has died and that classes will be suspended until further notice until they make sure that they can keep the students safe. We don't know how long this will happen, but we will reopen when we feel it is safe to do so. He informs them, and as the students gloomily move through the halls, Eric looks at his brother, telling him that he needs to grab his stuff. Okay, I'll let Sif know to prepare the Rainbow Bridge, he says as he reaches for his phone. I know it's not ideal, but I'm excited to be going home for a while, Eric says as he opens the door to his dorm, reaching for his bag. But a portal opens and Pulsari reaches through. Unfortunately, you will not be seeing your home again, he shouts with glee. Olivie races into the room, but is shocked to see his brother gone. Later on, how could you? You traded your firstborn son for a piece of jewelry? Olivie shouts to his mother as the rest of the restaurant patrons look in shock. Enchantress raises her wine glass to her lips, taking a sip as she waves off the owners. Michael, Christina, would you excuse me? My son Olivie seems to have forgotten his manners. Olivie sits down as Enchantress once again explains that she never intended to have children. It was an easy deal to make, she says, finally standing, opening up a portal, asking if Olivie wishes to sulk or to help her get his brother back. He finally stands, following her. Welcome to Weird World, she says with a gesture, leading him to a nearby town now that they've entered the Weird World. It's there that they find a strange bumper car that they begin to use. We have to find the wizard as fast as we can and get Eric back and get out of this hell hole, she says, putting a helmet on Olivie before they take off. How do we even find Pulsari? He asks, and she nods, explaining that Weird World is tricky. Things constantly shift. We're going to need to visit Chase and Avery, the map makers. Their journey quickly takes them to a roadside cart. And in exchange for 2 ice cream cones, Enchantress managed to get a map that will bring them right to the wizard Pulsari's castle. It's Olivie that is a little confused though, because the map appears to be bringing him to a former friend's house. But as Enchantress informs him, it would appear that Pulsari now lives there. Meanwhile, over at the Crystal Castle, Eric is slowly beginning to drain away, as Pulsari is looking into a crystal ball, seeing that a second-born son is on his way to finish the bargain that Enchantress has started. As Enchantress and Olivie begin to drive through Weird World in their bumper car, they begin to have a heart-to-heart as to why Enchantress was sorry that she wasn't there for her children, that she just truly didn't know how to be a mother. She couldn't find that kind of magic. She says with a sigh, but their conversation is interrupted by a loud bellow of rage. Both Enchantress and Olivie begin to roll out of the way as the woman is screaming, "Die, wizard!" But Enchantress waves her arms, making vines reach out and grasp at the woman. Who are you and why do you want to kill me? Olivie asks as he walks up to the trapped woman. I am Goletta, the wizard slayer! She snarls. But Enchantress steps past her son, smiling at the woman. Well, you're in luck. We're on our way to see a wizard who just may need some slaying. What if I ask you to spare my son and me? Instead, join us on our journey to slay a much more deserving wizard. Goletta's rage subsides for a moment. Which wizard would that be? So a short time later, all 3 of them are now standing before the Crystal Palace, with Goletta pointing out that it is a great honor to be the one to slay Pulsari, since he has brought much misery upon the land. Had I known that he had been unstoned, she begins, but is interrupted as Pulsari calls out from above them. You would have gotten yourself killed, just like you will today, Goletta. I'm afraid your axe will not be removing my head anytime soon, he says as he floats down towards them, holding the frail Ilric in his hands, dropping him to the floor as his minions begin to appear around the trio. I'm so glad that you brought your second son along. This one is a little worn out. I could use a new one. And Enchantress stares at her son in horror. He's drained Ilric of everything, she wails, and Alvi stares grimly. Then I say we kill him. What do you say, Goletta? Alvi snaps, and the three leap into battle against Pulsari's minions, but quickly discover that they couldn't keep them down. One attacks Alvi from behind, covering him in black tar. Mom, I can't move! He shouts out, but Enchantress is there, using her magic to blast the monster away from her son, bending down to his aid, words caught in her mouth. I know, Mom, he says quietly. Meanwhile, Goletta is rushing to Pulsari, blocking his magic. You are an unworthy foe, and I am ready to end this fight, she shouts, slamming her axe into his chest. And as it sinks in, Pulsari just laughs unaffected. You dumb barbarian! My skin was born of nether beast and leathered with the blood of the first dragon. It cannot be penetrated, he gloats, but Goletta begins to laugh just as hard, pointing out that she wasn't trying to kill him. I was chopping off your pretty necklace so that the boy here can destroy it in you. She laughs, holding up his magical necklace that acts as a battery for Ilric's power. Alvi steps forward, using his magic to destroy it, leaving Pulsari withered as an old man on the floor. No, I am nothing without the boy's magic. And with the mission and quest done, Ilric is restored, and the Crystal Queen thanks Enchantress and her sons for helping restore her family to the palace. The two mothers smile as their sons head off to enjoy their time away from school. But now that we've seen a little bit of the aftermath of the death of Doctor Strange, we cut back to the Death of Doctor Strange issue 3. Some time has passed, and the Stephen Strange from the past is standing over his body in the autopsy room, tapping the recorder indicating that he will be acting as the mystical forensics. He begins assisting Jane Foster as she picks up her scalpel, and they begin. In the Avengers briefing room, the team is gathering as Clea, the former wife of Stephen Strange and the Sorcerer Supreme of the Dark Dimension, explains the origins of the three mothers, the ones who are starting to cause problems now that Stephen Strange has been killed. They came from beyond the outer planes. She begins creating a ball of magical energy to show her words. She tells them that the three of them are warrior queens who carved across the dimensions with the sole purpose of annihilation for the sake of their child. The child, please tell me about it, Lady Clea, Thor bids, and she nods. The Peregrine is hungry, she says, telling them that the child is an apex predator that feeds on magic. Its favorite prey? Powerful beings of magic, like the warlords, like me. Explaining that its origins are unknown, but some believe that it is the feeder extrusion of some vast ninth dimension hyper creature. She squashes the magical ball in her hand. The mothers are its vanguard, tracking powerful magical beings so that the creature may be fed. She says to them, the pieces are beginning to fall into place, Stephen Strange says as he walks into the room with Jane, explaining to the group that powerful magic was used against the Stephen Strange of the present on the night of his death. His hands were taken as an act of ritual theft. My soul was stolen, and with it my power and the power allowed to me as the Sorcerer Supreme. Without my soul's passing on, and without the magic of the Sorcerer Supreme, it all dissipated back into the ether. There can be no new Sorcerer Supreme. Strange tells them, and Clea nods, believing that the Earth will be doomed if it doesn't have a new Sorcerer Supreme, but begins to question why the warlords would even bother to come to Earth. It's the perfect place to hide, Wong says as he stands, believing that the warlords wish to make their problems the Earth's problems, and they want the heroes of Earth to fight for them. And we'll stop them. We're the Avengers, Captain Marvel states, with Stephen hoping that it is true, but explains that he believes that the Sorcerer Supreme is the only thing that can stop these three women. He looks at the other heroes and tells them that they need to deal with the invaders, that he must restore the office of Sorcerer Supreme. Magical mist beginning to swirl around them. I know the reason for my death. What remains is how and who, he says as they disappear. Back at the Sanctum Sanctorum, Clea waves her hand and sends her spirit away to search for the answers that they require. Stephen and Clea are left alone. They're quiet for a moment before Clea begins to explain to Stephen that he made her forget about him, about their relationship, that it was needed as payment to a devil for remaking the universe. Tears begin to fill her eyes as she explains that when Stephen died, her memories were restored of their time together, so that the devil could feel her suffering. And now here you are, as cold and brilliant as when I first met you, as when I first thought I could love you, and you don't even know me. She whispers to him, and Stephen reaches out, explaining that everything that he has seen in this time will never be his. The worst thing is seeing how he lived to be a fool, because a man who had your heart and lost it, I could be called nothing else, he says gently to her, and there's a pause as she leans in kissing him, but he pulls away, explaining that while she is beautiful and brilliant, it would not be right for him to take advantage of her grief. She nods and stands. I'm sorry, she says quietly, but they're interrupted as the spirit returns, and the spirit calls out to Clea, explaining that she has found the Eye of Agamotto and the Cloak of Levitations. Far from here, mistress, caught up in the stone and the mortar, a place called Castle Mordo. Mistress, the spirit calls. Back over in the home of the evil villain Baron Mordo, the wall explodes inward as Strange, Clea, and Wong float there. Stephen quickly moves, using his magic to fight through Mordo's animated armor, and the statues come to life. Finally, he turns and senses Calculus hiding in the shadows, and Stephen moves his hand, pushing the former mage against the wall. Where's your master worm? Strange demands, fear filling Calculus's eyes. There, he stammers, pointing with a shaking hand. Strange nods, stalking towards the door, and Clea and Wong are at his back. I implied earlier that it was no surprise to see you standing over my corpse, Carl. It was a surprise. It was a surprise because I could not believe that after all those years I hadn't killed you yet. But don't worry, Carl. That is a mistake I intend to correct. Strange calls, and on the other side of the door, Mordo is clutching the Cloak of Levitation in the Eye of Agamotto, fear in his eyes. But before we can see how Doctor Strange handles Baron Mordo, it's time to move over to see what is going on with Spider-Man. This takes place during the Spider-Man Beyond arc, so Ben Reilly, the clone of Peter Parker, is actually Spider-Man while Peter Parker is in the hospital. This is The Death of Strange, Spider-Man. The current Spider-Man, Ben Reilly, arrives at Peter's hospital room. It's there that he finds Felicia Hardy sitting by his bedside. How is he? Ben asks, but Felicia doesn't want anything to do with Ben, believing that Ben has used Peter's situation to his advantage and stolen the Spider-Man name. The two begin to argue back and forth, with the unconscious Peter being none the wiser. But that fight is suddenly interrupted as a bright light fills the room and Doctor Strange's head floats over Peter's bed. Spider-Man! The apparition shouts. I apologize for the abrupt nature of this message, but if you are seeing this, I am dead. This is but one of a number of spells that I have prepared to activate in the event of my death. Please make your way to the sanctum immediately. I fear I must ask a boon of you, my friend. Ben and Felicia glare at each other for a moment, but shortly swing through the rooftops of the city. You don't have to come with me, Ben repeats to her, but Felicia shakes her head, reminding Ben once again that he is not Spider-Man. Besides, I have to see this for myself. I just got done saving Strange's life. Now he's gone? I don't buy it, she says as they arrive at the sanctum and they tap on the window, drawing Wong's attention, who opens the window, greeting them both. Is it true? Ben asks. It is. It's going to be a difficult night, Wong tells them, but Black Cat looks up, seeing the younger Stephen walking in the background. He's right there! I can see him right behind you, she declares, but Wong doesn't bother looking. It's complicated, he tells them, and he hands them a list of notes, explaining that with Stephen's death, several magical bindings that he has worked throughout the city will begin to loosen. They need to be stopped before they hurt anyone. Spider-Man and Black Cat don't waste any time before they begin to move through the city again, passing a dark office where a cleaning lady is working hard. As they swing through the city, Ben looks at the papers. Strange left us a numbered list of chores and dossiers on each, he says, and Black Cat nods, asking where they're heading first. 1. Ensure that Gator Shaman has not discarded the treaties in my absence, Ben reads, and they shortly find themselves in the sewers, fighting against albino gators as the hobo shaman stands nearby. Doctor Strange is dead! The winds of magic sing of his demise! The treaties are gone! The gators will rise! He shouts as Ben punches another gator, flipping over a second one and shouting for Black Cat to grab the shaman. She comes up behind the shaman, punching him in the face and knocking him down. You think Strange kept you and your gators underground because he was a jerk? She snaps, ordering Ben to read the paperwork given to them, and Ben pulls it out, having webbed up the gators. Okay, here we go. The albino sewer gators of New York are one of the city's hidden wonders. While the gator shaman believes our battles to be of dominance for the city, in reality, I clash with him merely out of concern for these creatures. If he were to succeed in bringing the gators to the surface, I worry for their safety. If their existence came to the attention of the Kravinoff family, then their extinction would be ensured, and the world would be poorer for having one less mystery in it. Ben reads. Shortly, the man is leading his gators back beneath the city to the safety of the darkness below. Their next stop is the Prince of Hearts, a fairy that eats the hearts of children. The pair find themselves on a fire escape, looking down on a bloody moon night. What? I told you I handled it! He explains, pointing up at the dead fairy on the ground. This is my territory. These are my people, he says, pointing to his mark on the wall. Moon Knight nods to them, bidding them good luck with the rest of their list as he disappears into the shadows. Next, they must make sure that the spirit of Mammon remains bound in bronze, finding themselves trying to wrangle the bronze bull statue in the city, followed by a Jiangxi attack in Chinatown. Then they fought against demons as they exercise the 666 train in the subway. Ben, meanwhile, lifts a hot dog cart over his head so that they can feed the Central Park dragon. They then head into the museum to fight against a group of mummies. Black Cat pours out a bottle of wine, appeasing the forgotten dead beneath James Walker's park. And unknown to them, the cleaning lady stands up straight, feeling her aching back, and she walks to another trash can, slipping on a solid drink, twisting her ankle and falling to the ground. Next up is the goblin attack, which Steven was certain would happen, and the two heroes swing through the air, chasing down the sports car as the goblins are swerving down the streets, cheering in their gibberish language. "You want to be Spider-Man, Riley? Then you better get used to goblins," Black Cat tells him as she lands on the car's roof. She reaches down, beginning to pull the creatures out of the car. "You horrible little things! How many of you little jerks are there?" she snaps. But Ben looks up, his spider sense warning him about a pedestrian on the road ahead. He leaps down, jumping in front of the car to stop it. "Have you lost your mind?" Black Cat shouts at him, but Ben puts his back into it. "Relax, the suit can take it." He gasps, and the car finally comes to a stop a few feet in front of the pedestrian. The man doesn't even look up. "And a pleasant evening to you too, fellow New Yorker," Ben says, with Black Cat kicking the last of the goblins away, looking to Ben to see what is next. "Thankfully, there's only one left, but it doesn't make any sense. If Strange wrote it down, it's probably important," Felicia says, looking at the notes over his shoulder. Meanwhile, the cleaning lady that slipped walks out of the building, limping slightly as she makes her way to the bus stop. It's there that she hears Ben's voice. "Jamina, we're friends of Steven's. He told us that he sometimes runs into you around this time, and that most nights after a shift, you could sure use a pretzel." Ben tells her, holding out warm bread. 22. Bring Jamina Garcia a pretzel at the end of her shift, and make sure she gets on her bus to safety. Steven had it written there. The woman smiles at Spider-Man and Black Cat as they sit with her, thanking them and asking if Steven is okay. Felicia informs Jamina that he's fine. He just had some business that took him out of town. She thanks them again, biting into the pretzel, telling them that her talks with Steven, they always seem to cheer her up. It's a kind of magic, she says with a smile, and the bus arrives, and she thanks them again, getting on, leaving them into the night. Felicia wipes away a tear as the bus rumbles off into the evening, and Ben looks at her, pointing out that the world needs a Doctor Strange, just like it needs a Spider-Man. "Right now, I'm what we got," Ben tells her. She glares at him for a moment before standing. "Fine, you're Spider-Man, for now, but it won't be long. But for now, see you around, Spider-Man," she says as she walks off into the night, leaving Ben with a small smile on his face. The man runs in fear down the streets of his village, blood splattered on the walls around him, and he passes a woman who begs for his help. But he shoves her aside, looking back briefly as her screams of fear and death reach his ears moments later. "Oh, human, so deliciously selfish, so ripe with fear," Akumaho says as he rounds the corner into the fox demon. He screams in fear, but his cries are cut off by the sounds of death. Meanwhile, in Seoul, South Korea, the agents of Atlas finish up another fight against the extra-dimensional creatures that keep dropping out of a portal over the city. A portal that opened up moments after the death of Doctor Strange. "The strongest demon that we have fought since the rips in reality opened," Mr. Enigma says as they finish the fight, and the group gathers together, preparing themselves for the next wave, but their comms beep. "There's been a change of plans. We have a situation." Jimmy Woo, the leader of the Agents of Atlas, begins to tell them, sending over a video of the recent attack. The hero known as White Fox, the supposedly only remaining Kumiho left in existence, looks on in shock as a video plays for them on the holo projector. "A Kumiho?" she gasps, watching as the demon cuts through the village. "Thought they were all extinct," Mr. Enigma points out, and White Fox nods. "Me too," she says quietly as she reaches out her hand, waving it through the hologram. "Who are you?" she whispers, and a short time later, they're all at the Agents of Atlas headquarters. "The Agents of Atlas think that it's you," Swordmaster tells White Fox as she walks into the room, and she smiles at him as she walks towards him, telling him that she had to come and see him to see if I did it. "Of course you didn't, but I have to ask because Jimmy," he explains, but she stops Swordmaster, informing him that she doesn't blame him, and she looks at the group, explaining that she'll head to the village to try and reason with the Kumaho. "If I can't, then I'll put them down myself, she says, but the Swordmaster shakes his head, telling her that he's going with her. You shouldn't have to face this alone, he says, and the other members of the team agree, letting the pair travel to the village while they defend the city. The portal opens up, allowing them to step out into a forest outside of the village. What are you thinking, Ami? Swordmaster asks her, and White Fox sighs, removing her mask, pointing to the village, telling him that she grew up in a small Kumiho town not far from here. She tells him that the legends state that the Kumiho can shapeshift and eat the hearts of men, and that people feared them, even the ancient Sorcerer Supreme. But she didn't listen to her family's warnings and snuck into the village, trying to meet some of the children and play with them. That's when the elders of the village knew who she was and what she was, and the next day the hunters arrived and slaughtered the Kumihos. Now you know a Kumiho's true nature and why Jimmy Woo looks at me the way he does, she says, and the two of them begin to head into the mountain, quickly finding themselves in a deserted village. So this is where the attack took place? Everyone's gone, Swordmaster says quietly as they look around, but they turn as voices reach them. Help me. Give me your blood, people begin to say as they hobble out of their destroyed homes. Unfortunately, I don't think so, White Fox says, her magic tails appearing behind her. Swordmaster draws his blade and both prepare to fight, leaping against the monsters. But their attacks pass right through them. Missed? Swordmaster hisses, but White Fox shakes her head and looks around. Not miss. Illusions, she whispers, looking up at the face of the great Kumiho that is standing before her. Ami, the woman says gently, and the White Fox steps forward, shocked to see her mother, having seen her die. We're hard to kill. You know that. The Kumiho says, a tear falling down Ami's cheek. But the Swordmaster steps between them. Ami, this isn't your mother and you know that, he says to his friend, and White Fox nods, her eyes beginning to glow. I do. But I wanted it to be, she says, preparing to attack, but the image of the Kumiho shifts, its tails becoming great snakes and its body beginning to rot, maggots crawling out of its eyes. You miserable little boy! I'll tear your heart out and eat it! The monster shouts as it leaps into attack, and White Fox retaliates, slashing at the snakes. How dare you steal my mother's face! I'll send you back to your dimension, you false Kumiho! The White Fox shouts, but the monster laughs, telling her that this is her dimension, that she was locked away long ago by a Sorcerer Supreme, but that spell has been weakened and she has been released. I was once a Kumiho! Now I am so much more, the monster snarls, its snakes lashing out, biting at White Fox and Swordmaster. I know your fears! The monster snarls, and Swordmaster's eyes widen as he sees her parents, begging him to help. He looks up at the image of Shiyu, the god of war, who will devour their world. Lin lies down to his knees, the sword falling from his hand. This can't be. He gasps, and Ami looks around, images of shadowy wolves rushing forward, attacking and killing her mother. I will delight in your fear! The monstrous Kumiho whispers to her, but White Fox whirls around, slashing her across the face. I'm not afraid of you. The worst things in my life have already happened. There's nothing that you can do to me, she says as she attacks the shadowy creatures, but the monster knocks her away. I was going to start with your friend, but I think I'll eat your heart out first, it says, looming over her. But Lin Lai is there, swinging his sword, the blade striking the monster, shattering it to pieces. And he looks up in shock, the divine sword of his family that was bestowed upon him to stop the Shiyu. How? He gasps, and the monster looms before him. Because it knows how weak you are, the Kumiho snarls, slashing at him and knocking him off the cliffside. Lin is still in shock at the shattered sword as he plummets away. Ami bellows in rage, transforming into her own true Kumiho form. You should have stayed sealed away. When I'm done with you, not even the Sorcerer Supreme will be able to put you back together, she roars, leaping at the monster, ripping off its snake tails with her teeth, biting into the monster's chest. It's over in moments, and the monster lays dead on the ground. Ami walks to the cliff, looking down for her friend. She travels down the mountain to the river below. It's no good. I can't pick up his scent. He's gone, she says as she transforms back. She attempts to gather the rest of the agents to begin searching for their friend, but it's no use. Swordmaster has disappeared. Without a word, it appeared that the seals of Shiyu's tomb were beginning to weaken. An exhausted White Fox would return to her quarters, where she kept a small piece of the shattered sword, looking at it for a moment, clutching it tightly to her hand. I couldn't save you. but I promise I'll do whatever it takes to stop Shiyu. What it takes. I will avenge you, she says to herself. Next up, we have Blade. Pripyat, the new vampire nation. The vampires are celebrating the sign of the old warehouse, declaring the death of Doctor Strange. The vampires are dancing in a 90s rave scene with sprinklers activating, spraying blood on the cheering creatures of the night. Blade, meanwhile, is the sheriff of this vampire nation, and he is leaning against the wall. A few of the younger vampires begin to challenge Blade, deciding that he is now weak as he is the sheriff of their nation, and that maybe Dracula made a poor decision, but Dracula's voice sounds from behind her. If I was so weak, Dahlia, do not think that I would not. But Dracula is behind Dahlia, telling her that maybe she should reconsider questioning his decisions, as while she is on his console, her goons are not. Blade just stands there menacingly making comments until there's a disturbance outside and he heads out in the streets preparing to do his job as sheriff. He leaps down into the streets, finding the estranged masked creatures, cutting their way through the vampire crowds. No words are even exchanged as he rushes forward, drawing his sword, dodging under the first man's kick and slashing through his leg into the head of the next stranger. The fight lasted mere seconds with him in charge. Dracula's bodyguards arrive, informing him there's no one else, but that's when Blade hears a noise. He moves over, pulling another strange humanoid out of the shadows, but this one appears to be a small child looking back at Blade and Dracula's bodyguard with fear. Without knowing what is going on, Blade wants to get answers, but Dracula is watching from his office and demands that this child creature be taken to the dungeon. He then informs Blade that he'll be needing him the next day, so he needs to be addressed appropriately. So the next day, Blade arrives at Dracula's council meeting, dressed in his finest black suit, his sword still sheathed over his back. He strides into the meeting, ignoring Dracula's announcement of his arrival. That's when Dracula sits, allowing the meeting to begin. The first order of business that is brought up is what will they do with the Avengers now that Doctor Strange is dead. But Dracula waves his hand, informing the young vampire that he has no plans for the Avengers and reminds her that she should not act without his consent. She challenges him, asking if he's afraid, and anger begins to flash in her blood-red eyes, but Dracula shakes his head, explaining that with Strange dead, there is no need to rush into any plans. Besides, his death seems to have brought a new diversion to our doorstep. Dracula states as the child is brought in by guard and forced to kneel before the Dark Lord. I didn't come to your party to watch you make a spectacle of a scared child. Watch yourself. Blade growls, but Dracula waves him away, explaining that they have discovered the child communicates through a form of psychic abilities. As sheriff, I presume that you want to hear their tragic tale before I decide their fate. He says, and the child begins to speak and images appear in Blade's mind of a city from behind their universe, where the bandits attacked, killing the child's people, but that's when a portal opened up, dropping the child and the bandits into their world. But Dracula is unaffected by the story, and the other vampires in the crowd make snide remarks until finally Blade steps up in front of the scared child. We're done here. You want to put the kid on trial? Then you don't do it with your audience. Anything else I'd say qualifies as torturing and tormenting a non-vampire. He says, but Dahlia draws a dagger from beneath her coat, rushing forward. How dare you, Blade? I'm sick of you, she snarls. But Blade draws his sword fast, blocking her attack and dodging under a kick, ready to strike. But Dracula grabs her from behind, lifting her into the air. Need I remind you how we behave towards guests? Dracula asks, tightening his grip and making Dahlia drop her dagger. He finally lowers her, ordering his guards to take her and the child away. And as they're led through the corridors, the child finally speaks. You're all so angry, he says gently, and he stops short. What if we put your rage to good use? He says, his appearance shifting to that of a more evil being. Both the vampire guards begin to become afraid, both of them dropping to the floor, curling up into balls as the young monster smiles. Fear is one of the easiest emotions to play with, he explains to Dahlia as she looks at him in surprise, but he explains that his people feed off of emotion. Impressive. I assume you did something similar at Dracula's party. Why should I trust you instead of killing you for meddling? She asks him, but he smiles back at her, explaining that he can share some of his power for a time. I simply want to feed, but I'm sure you can think of a few ways to use your enemy's fear and anger against them, he says with a wicked smile. Dahlia nods, shaking his hand, the energy coursing through him and her. Oh, I most certainly will, she says with a hiss. Meanwhile, Dracula and Blade are finding the guards later, still hiding out in fear. If she's hurt the kid, Blade snaps as he turns to leave, but Dracula points out that Blade might not understand what happened. Do you not realize that child is a psychic vampire? The Dark Lord asks. Blade doesn't believe him at first, but Dracula points out how the child managed to play Blade, make him feel more sympathetic. Why didn't you take him out immediately then? Blade asks, but Dracula tells him that he used the child to get rid of Dahlia. I should have been more wary of the two of them teaming up and being nuisances. Dracula sighs as another guard enters the room, telling Dracula that they just picked up Dahlia's trail. Well then, Blade, I do believe that it is time for you to step in and be the law. Blade arrives at the center of the city where Dahlia is standing on a pile of vampires, others surrounding her, attacking each other out of fear and rage. Blade is amongst them in a moment, his sword flashing as it cuts through the out-of-control vamps. But Dahlia whirls around, leaping at him and tackling him to the ground. It'll be more fun to kill you when you're feral with rage, Daywalker. She snarls at him, but Blade only smiles at her surprise when he doesn't turn. You think I need a few magic tricks to hate your ass? He asks as he flips her off of him. She lands in the shadows prepared to fight, but her eyes go wide as Dracula appears behind her and immediately grabs her, disappearing. Blade turns back to the crowd, looking for the child, but he's already standing there. Let me help you, although I think you'll find it I'm a rather emotional one, the child says, transforming before Blade's eyes into a strange, tall creature with a single eye, a massive arm lashing out, slamming Blade hard against the wall. He pulls him back, slamming him again, and then whirls, throwing Blade through a nearby street lamp. The rest of your kind would have been drained empty by now, or been consumed by their own emotions, and yet I suspect that you could feed me for a lifetime. The psychic vampire laughs as it stalks forward. Guess I'm made to be different, Blade says as he wipes blood from his face, but as he stands up, he smiles. Been a while since I fought so long that I get to see the sun come up, he says, motioning over the monster's shoulder. The one-eyed being looks and points out that the sun doesn't hurt him. Didn't think it would, but it means that it's time for the streetlights to go out, Blade says, reaching for a shattered street lamp and ripping it free, whirling it around, stabbing the monster through the chest. With that, the sun begins to rise as the psychic vampire falls to the ground, dead. Blade turns back to the shadows in the alleyway, finding Dracula waiting for him. You saved many of my citizens, the Dark Lord points out, and Blade turns to walk away, without so much as a reaction. I didn't do this for you. Sunrise is here and I suggest you go to bed, Blade hisses as he walks into the daylight. Next up, we have the X-Men and the Black Knight and their reactions to the death of Doctor Strange. The Black Knight in this current timeline is Dane Whitman, who many of you may know from the MCU's introduction of him. Dane Whitman sits back on his throne, scrying the events from a few days ago, watching as the X-Men fight against a zombie horde in the middle of London. They work together, fighting off that horde and saving everyone. But afterwards, as they're cleaning up the mess, a black void opened up over the city, red lightning crashing down. Now that's weird. Dane mutters to himself, with the image shifting again as he sees the catalyst that brought forth this void. Doctor Strange with a dagger in his chest. Doctor Strange is dead, he gasps, a moment passing before he sits back down, his eyes beginning to glow as he reaches out to his daughter. Sword, this is Siege. Did you hear what I just said? He asks. Flying through the rainstorm, Jackie Copra, the new Black Knight, responds. Of course I bloody heard. Your magic chair's zapping your voice right into my brain. It's very annoying, Dane. She snaps, but Dane points out that they're supposed to be using code names. You only wanted code names because I won't call you Dad. Dane finally relents and the chair begins to work again, showing him visions of the past. Of Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone, of a great void appearing over England, of Merlin trying to discover what the void is and believing it to be a lost fairy realm that was denied birth into the other world. The Hungry Land. Dane hears Merlin state. It's what ate London 2 days ago, he tells Jackie as she flies closer to the swirling storm that has engulfed London. The Hungry Land, I'm going in, she says as she lowers the helm of her black armor. She pierces the storm, flying into the twisted landscape that London has become. Dane still nagging in her mind about following his directions, that the armor and sword caused her to become more negative. She lands on the twisted street, and her eyes widen as she sees the monstrous creatures that were once the X-Men. Dane, thank God you're here. Stay low. They drain people and enslave them. Get down and don't let them see you. A voice cries out from behind Jackie, and she turns around to see Phazia, the current wielder of the Excalibur. Jackie begins to state something, but Phazia asks Dane what's wrong with him. Why is his voice weird? Dane responds in the helmet, telling Jackie to tell Phazia, tell her it's the new helmet. Tell her I'm sorry that I never replied to her text messages. And Jackie coughs. I have a cold, and I think a British accent suits the knightly idiom better. Phazia agrees, readying her sword and asking if Dane wants to call the shots. But Dane keeps talking into Jackie's mind, telling her to follow Phazia's orders. But the sword has already begun to anger Jackie. She leaps up onto her Pegasus's back, believing that she shouldn't listen to anyone. This is my bloody quest, she says, flying out to meet the monstrous X-Men, avoiding their blast and flying towards the dark god in the distance. It's the Necromon, the hungry shade of a dead god, Dane tells her, asking her to go back and work with Phazia. But Jackie isn't listening anymore, flying straight towards the giant, but a blast from the monster that used to be Cyclops takes her out of the sky, knocking her to the ground. The creature that was Jean Grey floats forward, sucking the life out of the Pegasus and transforming it into a zombie. Your steed is pitiful, but the warrior resists, she growls as her powers overtake Jackie, but she senses the black sword's power, ordering her minions to take it. Wolverine leaps forward to attack, but Phazia is there, holding him off with her magic. What is wrong with you? Why did you run off like that? Phazia asks Jackie as she helps her back up, but Jackie pushes her aside, meaning to kill the giant by herself. It's at that moment that Cyclops hits her again with a blast, and Phazia has to run over to heal her. But once again, Jackie pushes Phazia off, and the two are forced to run as another blast is aimed at them. Finally, Phazia figures it out. Who are you? Jax. I'm his daughter, the one he never bothered to contact. And Phazia nods, not surprised. That's not fair! I didn't know you existed! Dane shouts in her mind, but the warriors whirl around together as Polaris appears before them, using her powers to yank their swords out of their hands. The blades then connect and a power shoots out, knocking Polaris away. Phazia keeps trying to work with Jackie as they avoid more of the blasts, but the ebony blade has now begun to corrupt her mind further, making Jackie believe that she doesn't need anyone's help. She's better on her own. That's when the great giant slams his hand down, flicking her away with a laugh, and Jackie slams into the wall near Phazia. Yeah, how's that working out for you? Dane tries to ask if she's alright, but the throne shows him another image of Merlin fighting against this void and realizing that it was the stone that was keeping the void at bay, not the sword itself. But Merlin had broken the stone, using it to create the ebony items. He had to use the other powerful magic users to seal the void away since he broke the stone. And with the death of Doctor Strange, nothing was holding it back as all of the seals from the Sorcerer Supreme were broken. The only thing that is stopping the two warriors from transforming is the magical energy within Excalibur and the ebony blade that is coursing through them. With that, Phazia continues to swing the Excalibur, the blade merely bouncing off of this giant. I don't understand! Excalibur has the power to slay anything! But Jackie gets an idea, pointing out to Phazia that Rogue and Sync will be able to absorb their powers if they're caught. The two warriors turn, leaping at the charging mutants. But as soon as the two mutants absorb their power, they begin to transform back to normal. Why do I feel like my mind is made out of shadows? Rogue asks as she struggles to her feet, with Phazia helping her up, explaining the situation. Jackie looks back at her as the other mutants are approaching, asking if she and Sync can spread the power around and free their friends. Rogue nods as she grabs Sync and flies into the air, and they both fly over to Jean Grey, absorbing her psychic powers and beginning to free the other X-Men. Finally, back to normal. The team launches an attack against the giant itself, but their powers don't seem to have any effect on the Dark God. Jackie finally turns to Phazia. Together? She asks. But even with the combined might of the Ebony Blade and the Excalibur and the X-Men, nothing seems to have an effect on the monster. So Jackie finally stops, raising the black helmet, reaching out to Dane. Dane, I don't know what to do. Help! she says, and Dane nods from his throne. I have an idea, but it's going to be a horrible one, he says, telling her to wait until Phasia is about to make a heroic strike with the Excalibur. Then, trust me, he says. It's Phasia who goes to stab the monster, with Jackie leaping in the way, allowing the blade to pass through her chest and into the monster. A bright light fills the area and the twisted world begins to disappear, with the heroes rushing forward to help Jackie, trying to remove the sword, but she stops them. The sword, it stays, she gasps. And Phasia nods, using her powers to reorganize Jackie's organs inside. That way she's not dying anymore. Phasia helps Jackie to her feet as she explains that they had to put the sword back into the stone to stop the monster. And the great giant bellows in rage as the light shoots from Jackie, destroying the twisted world around them. Finally, everything is returned to normal. With that, the X-Men begin to depart, with the X-Jet arriving, and Jackie grabs her Pegasus, informing Dane that she and Phasia will be returning to the castle. Sure, I'm just going to have a real quick shave for unrelated reasons. Dane responds to her. Mordo hides behind his door, having just listened to the young Doctor Strange, Clea, and Wong fight their way through his castle. Fear in his eyes as Strange threatens to finally kill him. But he stops. No, he says simply, a look of determination in his eyes as he opens the door, revealing himself to his foes. I am Baron Carl Amadeus Mordo, Lord of Castle Mordo. I have done much evil in my life, and I feel remorse for none of it. My only regret, my single lament, is that I am innocent of the murder that you accuse me of, Strange. And I will not be spoken to in such a manner in my own home, he says grimly to the trio of heroes, tossing his cloak, his eyes at their feet, folding his arms and asking Strange, if I had really murdered you, would I lie about it, even if my life is forfeit? He asks, and Strange looks at him for a moment, pondering the question. No, damn you. And with that, our heroes leave, having figured out that, well, Mordo didn't do it. So later, back at the Sanctum Sanctorum, Strange stands by while a hologram of Captain America fills him in on their fight against the Child and the Three Mothers, showing him footage of their attack and the murder of Dagoth. How is your investigation going, Stephen? Captain America asks, but Strange shakes his head as he tells the captain that they're at a dead end. Don't give up, Doctor. Captain America out. Strange throws the Avengers hologram card away frustrated, and Wong tries to console him. But the young Strange falls to his couch, exclaiming that he just doesn't think that he's smart enough to solve his own murder. I thought myself so clever. I don't recognize this world, what the universe has become. This life was led for years in my subjective future. I don't recognize any of the people. How did I think that this would work? He demands of himself, but Clea walks forward, kissing him on the cheek. You thought you were Doctor Strange, master of the black arts, and I believe in you. Because at the moment in time you come from, you still believe that you can fix anything. Strange sits around as everyone leaves him to think about everything that is going on until his ghost Basset Hound shows up asking if he would like to go for walkies. They walk through the quiet night as Strange runs through his thought process on the case, pointing out that it should have been Mordo, since as far as this Strange knows, he's the one that hates Doctor Strange the most. But look at it this way, who hates you both? Bats pointed out, explaining that whoever did this used Mordo's own methods to set him up, knowing that everyone would believe that it was Mordo. The real murderer also did a blow against Mordo by taking the murder of Doctor Strange away from Baron Mordo. Who would attack us both? Doctor Strange ponders, and the answer suddenly springs into his mind as he begins to run through the park. Come on, Bats! I have a lead! He shouts over his shoulder, leaping into the air and floating away as he tells Bats that they have to gather everyone together. Bats asks him why, and Strange tells him, because this is a mystery, little friend, and that's how it's done. So, Strange gathers everyone and walks through a portal flanked by Clea and Magic, who tell him that the X-Men are on standby. Inside, he sees a gathering of extra-dimensional warlords as well as Mordo and Calculus. You all know who I am. You all know what's been done to me, and you all know which of you are actually guilty in this crime, he says as a way of greeting, and the warlords greet him, making snide comments and angry statements. But Strange ignores them, going on to explain what has actually happened in this entire situation. He explains that the powers of the four warlords were channeled through a pawn, who only joined forces with them for self-preservation, wishing to escape the Earth, fleeing from the Pergerin child and the three mothers, hoping the combined efforts of the heroes of Earth could stop them. And for all of that to happen, the Sorcerer Supreme had to have been slain. So they needed to find someone with a personal grudge against Strange, and it took some time for Strange to figure it out, but he finally did, turning to the Gathering. I was told that I exiled a man into the purple dimension, a man who served as a dire enemy of mine, he says, pointing out that Mordo never tried to save his servant. Isn't that right, Calculus? He asks, whirling around and pointing at the magician. The man begins to grin, and then he laughs, reaching down, removing his gloves. God, Strange! You really do enjoy hearing yourself talk. You are correct, of course. This has been such fun. He says, completely removing the gloves to reveal that Doctor Strange's hands have been grafted onto his body, and the power of the Sorcerer Supreme is now coursing through him. And I will kill you again with your own power. The young Doctor Strange stands ready, his hands glowing as Calculus prepares a spell with Strange's own hands that were grafted onto his body. The three mothers are here, the Pergerin child is here. One of the Agamon shouts from the window as the sound of destruction reaches them, and he holds out his hand, creating a portal and bidding them all farewell. But Doctor Strange stops him, explaining that Wong has already cast a spell of binding upon the castle, which will allow none of them to leave. For once, dear warlords, you will be made to face the consequence of your own actions. Either we will prevail here today, or we will all die. Doctor Strange tells them in a shout of anger. Are you forgetting something? Calculus shouts as he attacks them with a spell, but Strange easily blocks it. It would be easy to do so. For all of your stolen power, for all of your rage, you are still painfully insignificant, Calculus. He says, holding out his hand, sensing all of the power that Calculus wields, all of the spells that he has cast. You have shield after shield, ward after ward. No combat spell may touch you. No weapon may hurt you, Strange says, holding up his hands and preparing his own spell. The Dark Wizard sneers back at him, whirling his hands into his own spells, and Doctor Strange retaliates with his own spell. But it doesn't seem to have an effect as Calculus knocks him to the ground. What was that? He demands, and Doctor Strange looks up at him smiling, explaining that he cast the one spell that Calculus wouldn't think to protect himself from. I'm a doctor. I cast a healing spell. A spell of regeneration, one that requires still living flesh and a soul for a base, and raw materials to be converted, consumed, with which to reconstruct. Calculus looks down at his hands in shock as they are now beginning to glow blue, and he doubles over as this light envelops his body. You can't do this, Strange! It's inhumane! And Strange nods as he stands back up. I am a master of black magic. I am inhuman when it is required. Perhaps in time I will grow to be kinder and more merciful. In fact, I believe I do. But that man you murdered, Doctor Strange tells him as he watches, no sign of kindness in his eyes. Calculus stands up and everyone looks in shock as the present Doctor Strange stands before them once more, revived from the dead through his own hands. I believe the word you're looking for is zounds, the young Doctor Strange tells his older version. Welcome back, Doctor. I'm afraid we won't have time for reunions. We have to go to war. He explains to his older self, and at that moment the fight begins with the X-Men and the Avengers arriving, fighting against the might of the three mothers. Inside of the castle, the young Doctor explains everything to the older Doctor. My mistake. I will not survive this battle. I've solved your murder and even undone it. But what I've asked you, demanded of you, is more important than all of that. From one dead man to another. Heed my advice, Doctor. The young Doctor Strange tells himself after their conversation. The two sorcerers gather with the other warlords and wizards outside, the fight raging on, with the mothers beginning to get the upper hand on our heroes. But both Doctor Stranges know this. They know that the battle would be lost without their heroes, and they know that they cannot win alone. This is a war of wizards, of sorcerers. The cloak flutters behind him as he appears upon the battlefield. The Sorcerer Supremes have gathered, creating a pentagram, a sign of protection. 5 Sorcerer Supreme sisters, we cannot hold it, the three mothers shout as they are now banished again by the ultimate might of all of the Sorcerer Supremes. They call upon their child, demanding that he help them, keep them from being banished. And the strange, dark child smiles, his eyes shining. Yes, for you, mothers, my power. He growls, but the spirit of the young Doctor Strange swoops in, reaching for the Perjuran child. No fear, child, for you face Doctor Strange, the master of black magic. He shouts. The child reaches out for the astral form, clutching at our young Doctor Strange. And he shouts back, "Hold your spells!" to the other Sorcerer Supremes. But the young Doctor Strange knows what he is doing as he is consumed by the child. The young version, the one that was brought to our time period to solve the death, disappears, but opens his eyes within the form of the child, great magical energy flowing in him. Like gasoline waiting for a match, and I will burn so brightly, he says with a smile. That's it! He's done it! Doctor Strange shouts to his friend as this child is clutching his stomach. But as that child is about to explode, our current-day Doctor Strange casts one more spell, teleporting everyone away before the magical explosion can undo their world. The battle is won. The heroes gather victorious, having defeated the three mothers, having defeated the Perjuran child, and having solved the murder of Doctor Strange, and reanimated him. Doctor Strange pulls Clea close to him, hugging his wife, explaining to her that the young Strange told him that he was a fool for giving up on her, for any reason at all. And she smiles at him, explaining that she doesn't intend to let him repeat his mistake. But Strange smiles sadly, knowing that death will not give him up so easily, as he begins to twinkle, and the magical energy that revived him from the dead is now being pulled from him. You see, death cannot be cheated even by the Sorcerer Supreme, and Clea realizes what is happening, that Doctor Strange is dying once more. She tells him that she will not allow it. You have my heart, you always will, but I must ask you to take upon yourself something else, Clea. It is unfair, in a life that has already been unfair to us, but I can trust no one else. He leans forward, and she whispers, of course, as the two share their final kiss. Doctor Strange drifts away to the world of death. Sadness is now in her eyes as she stands there, holding the cloak of levitation in the eye of Agamotto, as Clea is now Earth's newest Sorcerer Supreme. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more full stories right here at the Comicstorian Full Story channel.